And I'm sure as far as Moses is concerned, that was good enough. He was probably feeling really high, but as I said, God kind of throws Moses a curve when he says, now Moses, I don't want you to just keep this experience all to yourself. You need to go and share what I just shared with the Hebrew people, specifically the elders. Now, if you read on in the story, Moses tries to wiggle out of that assignment. He tries to make all kinds of excuses why he should have to go and talk to the Hebrew elders. And every time Moses throws out an excuse, God counters, and this wrangling goes on between Moses and God until finally God wears Moses down and Moses relents. All right, I will go to the Hebrew people and I'll share my faith story. I'll share with them my experience with you and what I have learned from you. But Moses really didn't want to. And in some regards, he's kind of like us. Because you see, each and every one of us also has a faith story. And like Moses, many of us are really reluctant to share our faith story with others. But we all have it. Every one of us here has a faith story. Now, some of our faith stories are kind of short, because maybe our faith journey is just kind of getting going. And some of our faith stories are really long, because our faith journey's been going for 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 years. And some faith stories are very elaborate, others are mystical. Some faith stories are kind of heady and intellectual. Some faith stories begin in the wilderness with a burning bush. And other faith stories begin in a worship service or at a church camp. Or we were out on the water fishing. And some faith stories begin at work or on the road. I got a call from one of my fishing buddies about 3 months ago. He said, Mike, I want to share with you a religious experience I had. I almost dropped the phone. Because you see, I've been working with this turned off Catholic for years, trying to get him to kind of move closer to God and trying to get him back into the Catholic Church or some church. So when he said he had a religious experience, it was like, whoa, yeah, I'll gladly listen to your faith story. So Denny said, well, I was on my way home from watching the Badger game. He's got season tickets to Badger basketball. This guy's, I've told you about him before. He's my 7-foot fishing buddy friend. We kind of look a little weird in the boat together, He's 7 foot. Big basketball guy. But anyway, he was coming home from watching the Badger game, and it was raining out. And he said the road was really slippery. And he said all of a sudden his deer jumped out right in front of him. He said he swerved to avoid hitting the deer, and at that point he lost control of his truck. He said he was really just fighting it hard to try and keep that truck from flipping, because he said, he just had this sense that this pickup that he was in was just going to start tumbling. He said, as I'm trying to fight this truck and the slide and gain control of it, he said it was something that I've never experienced before. He said it was like someone took control of the wheel. He said, Mike, my hands were on the wheel, but I was aware that I wasn't turning it. Something was turning it. The truck continued to skid for a long time. He said it didn't flip. He said all of a sudden we just came to a rest on the shoulder of the road. He said I just sat there and I just shook. And then I slowly drove off, he said, reflecting on everything that had happened. He said, when I got home, I realized that God was in that truck.
Amen.
He said, I realized that God took the wheel. Kind of like Carrie Underwood's song, Jesus take the wheel. That's what he was describing me. He said, God took that wheel and kept that truck from flipping. I said, well, Denny, now what are you going to do with this experience? He said, well, I'll tell you, since that happened, I've been praying to God every day. Now, again, I almost dropped the phone because, for my friend, that is a huge transition in his lifestyle, to be praying every day. I said, you going to church? No. And he's not there yet, but at least he's praying. For my friend, this, I think, is probably the beginning of his faith story. Faith stories, we all have them. My friend now has the beginning of a faith story. Moses had a faith story to share with the Hebrew people. You have a faith story as well. But if you're like many people, you're probably not really able to articulate. Oh, you know you believe in God. You know you've had some situations where you felt close to God. But if someone had asked you right now, can you tell me your faith story? Can you tell me about your relationship with God? How you came to know God? How old were you when it began? How have you grown because of your experience with God? If someone had asked you those questions, if you're like many, you probably will not be able to respond because you haven't thought much about your faith story. And if that's where you are, then you've got some work cut out to do. Because you see, God wants you to share your faith story.
Amen to that. That he does.
Whatever it is. God expected Moses to go to the Hebrew elders and share his faith story with them. Talk to them about how he experienced God and what God wanted them to do. And God expects us to share our faith story as well. But if we're going to do that, well, we got to think about that. We have to kind of put it together and flesh it out and be able to share. Here are some experiences I've had. And here is how I have changed and grown as a result of those faith experiences. We all have a faith story. Many of us need to formulate it. But we need to do that because God expects us to share our faith story with others. Moses had a lot of time to kind of put his faith story together. When Moses had the burning bush experience, he was in the land of Canaan. And the Hebrew people were back there in Egypt. And so Moses had all the time in the world as he traveled from Canaan back to Egypt to put his faith story together so that when he went before the Jewish elders, he could articulate his experience with God, what he learned from it, what God wanted them to learn as well. And so we have time, like Moses, to put our faith story together. Now, if you're able to share your faith story right now, that's great. If not, as I said earlier, you've got a little work to do. Because someone, son, daughter, grandchild, close friend, fellow worker, someone is going to ask you somewhere down the line about your faith journey and your faith story. And when they ask, hopefully you'll be able to respond. Because if you don't, then they're going to sense that your faith isn't very important. And your faith journey isn't very important. And if it's not important to you, why should it be important to me? So, it's important for you to respond when you're asked, and someone is going to ask you. God expects you to share your faith story. And the wonderful thing about sharing our faith story, whether it's a little story or whether it's a big story or a mystical story or an intellectual story, the wonderful thing about sharing our faith story is that people listen. They will listen to your faith story. They listen because they like you or love you. They listen because they respect you. They listen because they trust that your story will be true. So if you share your faith story, they'll listen. No doubt about that. I told some of the folks in our Bible study on Wednesday that I've got to sit down with a young man and have lunch with him here in the future because he wants to hear my faith story. And I want to tell him my faith story because, you see, at this point in his life, he's an agnostic. Now, an atheist is someone who is convinced there is no God. That's an atheist. There is no God, period. An agnostic, like this young man, is someone who thinks there could be a God, but they're not sure. And so he wants to hear my faith story because he's trying to figure out, is there a God or not? Now I want to sit down with him and share it. Because he's a good young man. He's got a lot of gifts and graces. But I know he could be better with God in his life. And so I'm going to do my best to try and nudge him to the point of belief. And from that point on, hopefully he'll grow to the point of taking belief and making it into faith. Because as we've talked before in worship, there's a difference here between belief and faith. So I got to get him first to believe. So I'm going to be sitting down and sharing with him. He'll listen. Everyone listens to faith stories. And some come to believe. But you have to share for that to happen. When Moses went to the Hebrew elders, they listened to his faith story. And we're told not only did they listen, they believed. They believed. And because they believed in their hearts then that God had heard their prayers for deliverance from slavery, and that God was going to rescue them and move them from slavery into freedom. And because they believed Moses' faith story, they went with Moses to make that first confrontation with Pharaoh about letting the people go. And then when things really got tough, because Pharaoh didn't want to let them go, and he started putting the pressure on the people because of Moses' faith story and their belief, because they listened, they remained firm and resolute. They didn't backslide in faith. So Moses' story brought them to belief, and that belief held strong even though Pharaoh increased their workload for all kinds of pressure on them. Because they believed Moses' faith story, eventually those Hebrew people would, as we all know,